Hello, and welcome to Freelance Frontiers, a weekly conversation navigating the future of flexible work. I'm Ray Hames, an agency expat, brand side leader, and former freelancer myself. And I'm here with Nick Hammond. Say hi, Nick.
How's it going?
A career freelance creative turned coach. We're here to chat about both sides of the freelance relationship, and we hope that our listeners will find something in here that helps them smooth out the bumps along the road working with and as freelancers.
And if you have any feedback, insights, questions, or would like to join us on a future episode, drop us a DM. Today, we are chatting about the pros and cons of specialists versus generalist freelancers. There's definitely a case for both, but it's important for both hiring managers and freelancers to be aware of the pros and cons before diving into new relationships. And speaking of diving in, let's get into it.
So, I know that you and I have both worked as your typical generalist type of freelancer. I think generally, you're a generalist when you describe yourself with a lot of slashes. Personally, I was a strategist / producer / copywriter / marketing director. You've been a designer / strategist / writer. What are your other slashes?
Yes. I wouldn't necessarily call myself a writer. I will try writing, but I don't think I would say I'm a writer. But yes, web designer, apparel designer, marketer, e-commerce, something or other. I used to try to wrap this up so I didn't have to give all the slashes because it's near impossible. So I would just call myself creative consultant because it felt like it kind of, touched a bunch of different things. But now I kind of feel like I fall more into like a creative strategist because it's more these independent roles mixed with some level of execution. So it kind of feels like where I've fallen lately.
Yeah. And like across the board, how do you feel about being a generalist?
I personally loved it. For the longest time, I kind of had considered stepping away from just specifically design for the longest time, specifically because I felt like I was kind of getting a little too pinned into specific roles. And it felt like more so at in-house jobs than in other places because they tend to want you to be doing specific things. But I also feel like in that environment, I wasn't like very much allowed to pursue other interests. So with freelancing, it was cool because it kind of gave me the ability to get into other things and then tie them back into design in a way that kept things feeling a little more familiar from what I've, kind of done for the majority of my career, but also new enough that I'm able to kind of bob and weave into different things.
Makes sense.
What was your experience like as a generalist?
I think it was a little bit of a mixed bag. I love being able to help solve problems. Like I love solving puzzles. It's just, my brain is really engaged that way. But I found that being a generalist and the type of work that I was doing, which was like really somewhere between marketing strategy and creative production, that I was getting really overworked. I was finding myself in roles where I wasn't presenting firm enough boundaries around where my both expertise and energy and capabilities started and stopped. And also probably the type of clients that I was working with, didn't have the right education around what to expect from a single person either. So I think that was, broadly speaking, tricky for me because I put a lot of expectation on myself to deliver a lot of different types of work. Everything from strategy to execution across a bunch of different channels, across a bunch of different industries. And one of the downfalls that I'm sure we'll talk about later in this conversation is like, when you're a generalist, you can't be an expert at everything. And so, for me, the pieces of the work that I was most proud of, there were certainly elements to it, like I think that if I could go back in time and be just a copywriter, like I love writing. I feel like I'm really good at it. But it didn't, on the same hand, didn't give me the same exposure to larger marketing problems that my brain also likes to solve for.
Yep.
But you look at like, but I look at those two sides and I'm like, well, I want to be good at what I'm doing. And when I was put into fully generalist, we expect you to be a marketing department of one. I don't think that I was able to deliver the quality that I'd want to deliver. And I also felt, like I said, kind of taken advantage of it in the same breath.
Yes, absolutely. So to kind of flip that on its head, then on the other end of the fence, I know you've probably hired a few generalists in your day too. Like,
That's true.
what's that like, and what's the mindset like of bringing on somebody who's in more of that kind of role?
Yeah, it's true. And it's interesting because definitely on the other side of the coin, you are looking for somebody that can, for me, it's especially because I know enough to be dangerous with marketing, in the marketing space. Like I have hired a couple different marketing departments of one in my day for my own companies as well as for my customers' companies. And what I've been looking for there is more or less a thought partner,
Mhm.
and I think that that has been a really successful way to look at what help filling in my gaps, knowing my own gaps. I think where I've learned from my own experience on the other side of the coin is being really mindful of where that should start and stop.
Mhm.
I like really have, as a hiring manager for that type of role, had to be really thoughtful about like what is realistic for one person to deliver. And you can't expect somebody to be a strategist and a photographer and a UX designer and an SEO specialist. Like that's a that's a lot of different types of hats.
Yep.
And I think adjusting your expectations for saying, hey, can you help me find out more about Y? Or hey, can you just tell me what you know about X? Like, and being okay with, the fact that somebody may not be a subject matter deep expert, but that they know more than you do,
Yeah.
can be a helpful way to look at that relationship. And certainly, I think that the best way for companies to look at kind of generalists is to help advise them on what type of specialists they need long term to support the business. So when you look at the overall, whether you're talking about a marketing team, whether you're talking about an engineering team, whether you're talking about an HR team, usually a generalist is going to be your first hire because
Mhm.
you need somebody to kind of help establish the lay of the land. But part of that role long term should be structuring a really strategic support system for the activities and initiatives that are going to be the most valuable to the business.
Mhm. I also thought the part that you mentioned about expectations is big too, because when I'm trying to put this into, a slightly different perspective, it's like if I'm going to be using Shopify to sell something online, I'm not necessarily going to be using their, abandoned cart emails or like certain features like that because it's more of an all-in-one type of platform. And it's like maybe at a certain part in my business, that's what I need. But at some point I'm going to outgrow that and I want to go to more best in class for specific things that are going to be connected in a different way.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So you got to know enough to work with the tools that you have, but also know those limitations so that, like you said, when you're ready to up level, you can bring in both the right tools and probably the right expertise to help you implement those tools when you're ready.
Yep. So then along that same kind of thought process, how do you decide when to look for someone who is really just good at one thing versus the more generalist kind of area of expertise?
I think it's when you know what you need, and that could be the very early days of a project, where you say, I need a creative concepting team to deliver 5 concepts that hit this brief. That's all they're going to do. I've got a production team waiting, but I need to start somewhere, and that's who I'm going to hire these specialists up front. It could be I'm building a website. I've got enough. I've got the content that I need. I've got the framework that I'm going to use, but I know nothing about SEO. So I'm going to hire an SEO specialist for, a 20-hour audit and recommendation,
Hmm.
because you think that SEO is going to be a valuable component of your business and your website moving forward. Um, that, like I said, it could happen at the beginning of a project. It could happen midway through when you've had a generalist say, hey, you really need to hire somebody else that does this special thing that I don't do.
Hmm.
It could be years down the line where you're filling in gaps and saying, hey, we've got a team structure in place. We've got a kind of motion that the business works through kind of on a quarter by quarter annual basis. But we know that there are going to be pulsed initiatives throughout the course of our business. that we need to bring in, hey, we need to work on our AI transformation initiatives in 2024. Doesn't mean that we're going to fire our whole team and only hire AI experts, but it means you hire, an AI integrations consultant to assess what you're working with, assess your business initiatives, and help define when and where and how to implement AI enablement across your business. That may require more hands on deck to actually execute. But I think that the short answer, that's a really long answer. The short answer is when you know what you need.
Yeah.
Because you're going to get better work, because you're going to get better quality work from a specialist faster and almost always more cost effectively than having a generalist have to learn on the job to deliver the same level of quality.
I think it also goes back to a conversation we had also about working to outcomes, because to your point, some of these things can happen at different time intervals, and it's not necessarily about time specifically. It's more about, based on the things that you're trying to do and where you're at, what is going to kind of close the gap between those two, which helps you to understand what you actually need or who you need to bring on the team to get there.
That's a great way of putting it as well, is because as soon as you know what the goal is, again, it goes back to defining the need.
Yep.
Yeah. So, and you've had a little bit of exposure, just like you've had a mixed bag of exposure in kind of generalist roles. You've been in more focused, specialized roles as well. Like, what has been your experience on that side of the coin?
Yeah, I've kind of learned over the course of my career that I crave newness and more of an ability to adapt to changing environments. It sounds pretty similar to your experience as well. So my trajectory with more focused roles is usually that they end up being really fantastic at first for the same things you mentioned. Like, I'm deeply interested in this, and allowing myself to kind of push everything aside just to do this one thing is super cool at first. Specifically because it kind of allows me to like hyper focus and learn a lot more quickly as to what I'm doing. But on the same side, that usually tends to wear off pretty quickly. And I start to get really frustrated because I'm like, okay, I feel like I've gotten this to a point where I've wrapped my head around it quite a bit. Now I want to start to figure out how does this piece fit into a broader ecosystem. And I think when you're specialized, it can be really difficult to have the space to allow you to go through that process.
Yeah, that makes sense, because you usually are in a little bit of a silo, right? It's sit down, do this one thing, do it really well,
and do it long amounts of time.
Yeah, and the best as a manager, you're like, do that thing, don't come up for air. And that can be hard to put what you're doing in context of the larger business. How have you seen, and you've also been on a lot of different teams with different mixes, like how have you seen specialists and generalists coexist best?
Yeah. So from a personal perspective, I think it's knowing what your individual strengths are and then knowing how that can kind of tie into other people on the team. Like, where is the overlap between my skill and someone else that I'm going to have to work with? And how do we kind of start to bring out the best in each other? But I also think that part of this kind of is reliant on more of a top-down approach, where if management can give employees the space to work this out within a team, that's kind of the most ideal situation, because you're allowing anyone that's working together to figure out how to do that in the right way based on what they're good at. And if you don't have that management style that allows you to do that, I think you can kind of get into some sticky situations, because you're almost more so being told what you need to do as opposed to figuring out what works best based on more of a, kind of adaptive approach.
Yeah, I think that is spot on. And it's interesting to think about the role of generalists within management versus specialists within management, because in my experience, if specialists are managing other specialists, the outcomes can be hyper powerful, because they know what they're asking for and they know what the success criteria truly look like. But you've got to be in a pretty big organization for that to be possible. I think in much smaller teams, it's almost always that somebody with more of a generalist background is leading a team and hiring those specialists to deliver distinct pieces of the puzzle.
Yep, absolutely. So then from a business point of view, I know that there can obviously be a time and place for both types of roles. Should we do a quick summary on like when a hiring manager should prioritize either a specialist or a generalist?
Yeah, let's try to do like a rapid fire round. So when do we think that companies should prioritize hiring specialists?
I think for me, the biggest, most glaringly obvious answer to that is kind of like larger teams, because you have more either specialists in other roles or generalists that can kind of handle the gaps. And so I think you're more likely to know when you need a specialist in a specific seat.
Yeah. I would add what I was saying earlier to that: when you absolutely know what you need,
Hmm.
and that you've got parameters for when you need it by as well, because that gives a specialist really firm guardrails to come in and deliver effectively.
Yep, absolutely. I think those are kind of the two main ones that come to mind for me. I think the rest can kind of be a little more fluid based on, the needs of the specific team and the organization.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. So when should companies hire generalists?
Yep. I think usually a little bit of a smaller team. For me, at least, it seems like that's when more of that can work out for the better, because you don't have as much of the resources to hire the specialist. So you need someone to be able to come in and out of different things.
Yeah, yeah. And on the same kind of on the inverse of knowing a specific project parameters, I think it's also worth mentioning that you bring in generalists when you don't necessarily know the right path
Yep.
to the ideal outcome, and you need somebody to help kind of wiggle through the mud with you to figure that out, because a generalist has enough knowledge and enough breadth of experience to say, well, I did this over here and this worked. Hey, I've got, some resources over here that, helped solve this problem at a similar past project. And, if they're not confined to a specific set of criteria for a specific process, they're probably going to be able to contribute more valuable thinking over time that'll help ultimately round out your own thinking as well.
Yeah, definitely. I think the other thing too, to kind of zoom out even a little more and have it be less of like generalist versus specialist, I think in either camp, it's also a matter of finding somebody who both functions really well within whatever role that is and loves what they're doing. Because I think a lot of times what happens is you can get someone who says, yeah, I love being a generalist, let's do it. And then the second you need them to pivot to something else, they start to flounder, and you're like, do you really enjoy this, or did you
Right.
just say that? So I
Right.
think that can also kind of be a part of the fit.
I mean, that's so true. And it goes back to our own personal experiences. Like, think about the times that you've been in a specialist role and then been asked to come kind of outside of that spectrum. And whether or not you're capable of it, whether or not you want to do it, those are two different questions. But even how much that detracts from your ability to deliver on that specialized work,
Hmm.
isn't the best use of your time.
Yeah. And I think that can also be a rolling conversation. Like I know that there's been situations where up front I've been like, yeah, I'm in a generalist role. Let's start to see what this new kind of piece of this involves. I'm thinking this is going to be great. And then as I start to get into it, I'm either like, hey, I don't love this, or hey, I'm not really great at this. We should go this way, which also actually feeds back into your point too, of like, as a generalist, based on your experience, you can also help to get a company the right specialist for whatever thing, needs
Right.
solving in that moment.
Totally. Totally. Great, great, great rapid fire round.
Yes. And we covered a lot, but I think that's probably it for this episode.
Yes, yes. Great chat as always.
Yes.
You want to do the
Well,
outro?
I'll do the outro.
There we
If
go.
you found this useful or not, follow us here and over on LinkedIn for more tips on how you can get the most of working with and as freelance talent.
Adios for now.
Bye.